YouTube? Welcome back. We have a huge video for us today. We're going to be getting our Triumph back together and figure out if we actually are in over our head or if it was just that Sprag clutch that needed a replacement. So tune on in. We're going to get this engine back together. We'll get it thrown back in the bike and we'll see if it runs. Alright, so just a refresher, if you're either new to the channel or if you haven't been watching our Triumph videos or maybe just haven't caught up on them. So this is our 1996 Triumph Thunderbird. I bought it off of Facebook Marketplace for, I don't even remember, I think it's like 800 bucks, something under $1,000, knowing it did not run. And the previous owner had told me they thought it was the Sprag clutch, but never really dug in to check it out, or at least they didn't tell me they dug in to check it out. So we took the time, we took the motor out. Well, first we tried to test fire it, confirmed it was the Sprag gear or the Sprag clutch. We took the motor out, we tore it all apart here, we got all our pieces up on our table. And now finally, let's see where it is. Finally, our new Sprag gear has arrived. We got this from Hermes Triumph. I'll put their website in the description of the video. So we're ready to go. That was our main replacement. So we need to replace our Sprag gear, which we've already removed. We have the new one to put in place. And then we have a couple O-rings, different gaskets, different seals that we need just to put everything back together here. Something else we will do is we'll upgrade our clutch springs along the way. And something we noticed around in our initial teardown of the motor was actually part of our clutch drum here is missing one of the screw bosses. So I also have a new one of those to replace as well. So we'll go through everything. I'm gonna go through the whole rundown of putting it all back together, replacing all the parts we need. First things first is going to be actually cleaning up the mating surfaces and getting that Sprag gear in. Essentially, we're into the motor as far as we need to be. We'll just lift up those transmission shafts to put the new Sprag gear in. And then we just need to make sure all of our surfaces are clean so that we can attach our upper crankcase, or I should say attach our lower crankcase to our upper crankcase. So we'll get into that now. Start by putting in our idle gear and getting that new Sprag gear, Sprag clutch installed. Alright, next to go in here is going to be our nice new Sprag gear, our starter gear, however you want to refer to it, our starter clutch. Alright, so now that we get that Sprag replaced up in here and the idler, we can start putting everything back together. So we'll start by putting our transmission shafts back in. We'll add a little oil into the into our bearing. I'm drawing a blank right now, but where our bearings sit, we'll add a little oil there, or bearing races, I guess you'd almost say. And then I'm also going to replace the oil seal on my main shaft. I think this is considered the main shaft. So I'm going to replace that oil seal as well, just to make sure there's no issues. And then we have everything reassembled as far as going inside of the case. So then we'll clean up all the surfaces and rejoin the uppercase half and the lowercase half. All right, so we were just about ready to put the lower crankcase on. And I may be overthinking things here, but it almost looks like I'm missing a gear because I don't really know much about transmissions, I'm going to be honest, but these dogs here don't interface with anything. And this gear here also doesn't interface with anything. So I'm starting to question this transmission shaft. So I'm going to do a little quick research here and figure out exactly what's going on. Maybe I'm overthinking things. But as we can see here on like this side, like these dogs, I'm just referring to them as dogs, but these like side teeth on the gears actually interface with something. But on this side, I feel like there should be a gear here or something for this to slide into and actually interface with. And also this gear, I feel like should be interfacing with something as well. So I'm going to do some quick research and I'll get back to you guys. All right, so we panicked for nothing there. This is actually on other models, if you had 6 speeds, this would be your shaft, your gear for your 6th speed or your 6th gear. So crisis averted. And I guess I should have kind of expected that because it never looked like the crankcase has been opened. And even though it looks like someone's gone around and messed with some stuff outside the crankcase, it doesn't look like they ever dug into here. So we're all good. We got the upper crankcase, or I should say the lower crankcase over here. So we're going to go ahead and clean everything up on that. And then the only other thing we need to do is just make sure, we always want to make sure we replace this oil pump O-ring, just to make sure we don't have any issues with our oil pressure. So we'll clean up the surface here. We'll rub everything down with acetone just to make sure we have no residue, no oil left over on any of the surfaces. And then we'll go ahead, again, we'll place that O-ring. We'll put all of our ultra black sealant around the mating surfaces. We'll seal it up hand tight for about an hour to let everything set. And then we'll torque everything down to the torque specs afterwards. Alright, so this is probably the part I've been dreading the most, honestly. We get everything cleaned up, we're ready to go. Now it's putting the gasket all on our upper crankcase surface and then bringing our lower crankcase and placing it on top. And then we'll bolt everything up, leave it to set for an hour, and then we'll torque everything down. So wish me luck. Alright, so everything went pretty smooth there. We did drop something in the motor first, but we fished it out with our magnets, so not a huge deal. So now that we've let the gasket maker cure for a little while, we're going to go through, we're going to torque everything down with the initial 12 Newton meters, and then go back around, and I think it's, whatever the tightening torque is afterwards. I think you start with 12 Newton meters and then 28, going in that specific sequence. And we did change the oil pump O-ring before we put everything on, so we're good to go. We're just gonna keep moving along here. Once we get the everything torqued down, we'll let that cure overnight, and then we'll just start bolting everything else on. We'll bolt the sump on, start putting our clutch in place, everything else, and we should have it back in the bike sometime tomorrow. All right, so we got some bad news here. In my haste, I decided not to use a torque wrench because I didn't have one for the low torque value. And I ended up breaking one of the bolts. So we can't move forward anymore. I'm gonna have to take everything apart, and we're gonna have to try to figure out how to get this bolt out of the upper case housing. All right, so this really isn't the best news, but we've had a chance. We slept, we took a little break, took a little time away from the motor here. We took it apart, and actually things are as good as they could be, relatively. So we did end up breaking the bolt. But what you'll see here is we've actually broken it proud of the surface, so this should be pretty easy relatively to remove. I shouldn't have to do any welding or anything. I should be able to grab this with a pair of vice grip pliers. Or locking pliers, and be able to loosen that up. So what we'll do is just that. We'll take that bolt out, and unfortunately, it actually is the same bolt that we use for our oil pan. So I do have a spare here, so at least I can get everything bolted up together while we get a bolt ordered to replace the broken one. But I can put the whole crankcase together, and I just won't be able to put the oil pan on, essentially, until that new bolt comes in. So again, relatively good news, all things considered. So yeah, what we'll do now is I'm gonna run to Lowe's. I'm gonna take the bug to Lowe's, go pick up a torque wrench, because I learned from my lesson on that one. Might need a new nozzle for my RTV or whatever, my Ultra Black Permatex. And then I'm going to grab the correct Torx bits, because I've been using kind of janky, not the ideal tools for that. And then we should be good to go. We'll clean it all up again. Again, we'll pull that broken bolt out. We'll put a new one in, and we'll continue on our voyage here. We're only about a day behind where we were, so lesson learned, use a torque wrench. Actually, that's the biggest lesson learned, use a torque wrench. And I also did notice here, I think I might have over clamped when I originally let the initial hour of curing, because all of the, mostly all of the gasket had been squeezed out completely, which really isn't ideal. We want it in between those surfaces to actually fill any voids. So I'm going to try to clamp a little bit less when we do our actual sealing process as well. But we'll run to Lowe's, we'll grab those all those different things we need, and we'll get right back into it. All right, so everything went smooth except they don't have torque wrenches here, or at least not what I need. I need something in that very low range. So I'm probably gonna head back to my house, do some research, and figure out where we can get a 3/8 torque wrench that goes down to like 30 Newton meters or lower. Actually, I need to go down to like 12 Newton meters. So we'll see what we can do, but we'll check in soon. All right, so off camera, we got everything cleaned up again. So we're pretty much where we were before. As far as ready to put this on, we need to get this strip bolt out. I'm hoping this is all we're going to need. So let's go ahead and give it a shot.
Yep, we got super lucky on this one that it broke proud of the actual block here. So no real heavy work needed. We'll go ahead and pull this out. We'll finish cleaning up all the surfaces and we'll mate it all back together. And again, we'll just need to reorder another one of these bolts. We'll steal one from the oil pan and get one of these back before we put the oil pan together, bolt it back up, or I should say the sump onto this motor. All right, so we got everything cleaned up. This time we used acetone and a little bit of brake clean. I think the brake clean actually might have worked better. You can put in the comments why you think that might is. I'm not a chemist, so I have no idea. The other thing we're gonna try here, so obviously we have a torque wrench, so we'll hopefully avoid breaking any bolts. I'm going to try to clamp this a little less tight in that curing stage because I think I may have over clamped and allowed too much of the sealant to press out and not actually sit in between those kind of like those joints there. So I'm going to try to do a little bit more lightly here, but otherwise it'll be all the same as before. We'll put our ultra black down, we'll put the case on, we'll let it cure for about an hour, and then we'll torque everything down. This time using a torque wrench, hopefully no issues, and I already get that new bolt for the sump on order. All right, so we just lightly tightened everything down. The sealant has cured, and now I'm realizing why I probably broke the bolt here. I was reading through our instructions, and so there's a tightening sequence where you tighten all bolts to 12 Newton meters, and then I thought you're supposed to retighten all of them to 28 Newton meters, but you're actually only supposed to tighten the large bolts to 28 Newton meters. I tightened one of the small ones to 28 Newton meters, and that's why it immediately broke. And now I have a real torque wrench, so we'll have no issues with any of that. We'll go ahead, we'll do this exactly how it says to, and then we should be good to just put everything back together. We'll let it cure for 24 hours fully tightened, and then we'll put on all the accessories and hopefully have this together in the next day or so. I guess a day or so after the 24 hours of curing. All right, so a couple days later here, and it kind of feels like we're in a time loop, but I actually feel like we're going in the right direction. So for the third time now, we split the crankcases, we cleaned off all that material, and then for the second time here, we actually had to remove that broken bolt. So we're pretty much where we were right before we put the crankcases together last time, with the main exception being I've taken even more care this time. I've cleaned up all of the bolts, chased all the threads on that, and I've also cleaned up all of the threads in the actual crankcase halves. So this should be our best possibility of getting everything to work right. The other thing I'm doing here that's different than previously is I'm going to be using this Permatex Right Stuff. My main reason for using this is first of all, it's recommended in a lot of the forums, but also it has a very quick cure time. This has a 90-minute cure time, so we can kind of make up for some of that time we've lost over the past couple of days. The sealant I was using before was a 24-hour cure time, so we'd have to wait a full day to get back into things. But this is only 90 minutes. So we'll do the same thing where we lay it all down, we let it cure for an hour, and then we'll tighten everything down. And it says you can add fluids as soon as 90 minutes. I won't do that. I'll just start building out the rest of the motor because we're still waiting for those new oil sump bolts to come in. But either way, we can get right back on track here. So I'm just gonna finish cleaning up the surfaces with some acetone, and then we'll go ahead and put our right stuff down. All right, so everything's actually going pretty smooth. We got it all together, just lightly hand tighten so that all of the sealant can cure. We're gonna give it an hour and then we're gonna torque everything down. And hopefully from there, we can actually move forward this time. Everything went together really smooth. So I'm pretty optimistic here, but that hasn't proved out earlier. So optimism isn't the only thing that's gonna get us through this. We have to make sure it ends up working here, but everything is looking good. So we'll give it an hour and then we'll hopefully tighten everything down and just keep moving on forward.
Perfect.
All right, so overall everything went really smooth there. I'm super happy that this time it worked out. So what we're gonna do next before I forget is we'll pop in a new seal for our clutch push rod, and then we'll start putting our clutch together on the other side here. So I'm just gonna push this in with a little bit of finger pressure, and then we can move over to our clutch, which is really the last major thing before we can start putting all of our different covers on, our sump back on, and get this thing thrown on the bike. So let's just pop this bad boy in. It's right here. And just like that, we're in. All right, so we'll go to the clutch next. So of course, aligning with all the jankiness we've seen so far with this bike, we're missing our shim for the clutch basket. I never had it. I looked back at my previous videos. It was never part of my assembly here, but we're missing that shim completely, and that's just gonna help us drive the spacing of where the clutch basket sits and also make sure there's no rattling occurring. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to add that to the list of things that we need before we can start the bike. And that's kind of a big one, actually. We're gonna keep moving forward, but I think this is just emphasizing that we're not necessarily gonna get the bike to fire in this video, but we'll do everything that we can until we get to a good breaking point, and then we'll call it and order all our new parts. All right, so even though we're running into some issues with our parts here, one thing we can do to keep moving forward is we can install our pickup coil, and this is just our magnet that's going to read our position for our crankshaft. So we'll have to rotate this just a little bit to make sure that lines up, and then we'll put a little sealant because we have a grommet for that pickup, and we'll install that and get that in place using our feeler gauge just to make sure we have the right air gap. So I'll move into that next, just trying to keep moving forward as we wait for more parts to show up. So our air gap needs to be set between 0.6 and 0.8 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is use 0.7 millimeters, and then I'll just make sure that the 0.8 should maybe not even fit at all, and that the 0.6 should loosely slide in. But before I do that, I'm just going to rotate the crankshaft to make sure that one of my pickup points is actually aligned with the magnet. Alright, so anytime you put your oil pan back on any motor, you want to start by cleaning that oil pan up. And then with these guys, what we'll do is we're obviously going to clean the inside of it. We already did the outside a little bit here. But the biggest thing for the inside of these pans is actually this little filter area here. There's a strainer, I guess, for our pickup. So we have our oil pickup right here. Looks it pulls it through, like it will pull through that initial strainer before it goes through our oil filter, I'm guessing, or something along those lines. But what's recommended is we actually remove this pickup, clean out that strainer before we actually put everything back together. So that's what we'll do first, and that will also help us get everything taken apart so we can fully clean it all. So we'll tear this all down so we can get to that strainer. We'll clean everything up, we'll put it back together, and then we'll get it on our bike, or on our motor, I should say, so then we can get it on our bike. And good thing we are. I mean, this doesn't have anything terrible in it. It's almost all silicone and sealant. Yeah, it's all silicone and sealant here. So someone at one point didn't do a great job with siliconing, and we see how much of that ends up in our oil pickup. And it's a good thing we have this thing here because that keeps it from going through our motor. So we'll go ahead, now that we have this all apart, we'll clean everything up, and then we'll just reassemble. Alright, so that's everything we have for today's video. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the clutch back in the motor and we couldn't get it back on the bike, but we'll be certain to do that in our next one. Really, the main thing we need to do is we need to get that clutch basket in, measure for the shim, get the shim ordered, and then we should be good to go. We'll get the bike, the motor all put back together, get it in the bike, and we'll get our first fire up hopefully. And if you know how to measure for that clutch shim, please let me know, because I actually can't find any solid detail on what exactly that clutch spacing should be or where I should be measuring it. So if you know how to measure for that shim, put it down in the comments. If you like what you saw, hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe for more content, and we'll see you in the next one.